You might have a picture in your mind of what the world of kink is like, maybe something from pop culture or, a fleeting headline.
Hmm.
But get ready to have your assumptions challenged. The reality is so much richer, more nuanced than you can possibly imagine. We're about to dive deep.
That's right. For this exploration, you shared Wild Side Sex, The Book of Kink by Midori, which is a truly fascinating
It
collection.
really is.
Now, this isn't some dry academic text. Think of it as a series of very personal essays,
Yeah.
written between, 1997 and 2005.
Yeah, about that time.
And Midori shares her own erotic thoughts, her observations of the kinky world, her personal sensual delights, and her advice on, everything from SM&Ds to specific and sometimes surprising fetishes and techniques.
And what's really striking as you read it is the language. It's intentionally raw, kind of sexual, reflecting the way people within these communities actually communicate.
Right, the vernacular.
Exactly. Our goal here isn't just to define terms you could find in a glossary. We want to pull out some key insights from Midori's writing that will really expand your understanding of alternative sexualities and the communities that have grown around them.
Hmm.
We're looking beyond the surface level. We want to understand the why behind the what.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that Laura Antonio, in her foreword, she describes Midori as a romantic realist.
Oh, I like that description.
Me too. She really captures how Midori's writing takes what can be seen as, taboo aspects of kink and makes them feel exciting, dangerous, sexy, thrilling, lusty.
Yeah.
It's this incredible blend of unflinching honesty and a genuine passion for the subject.
Absolutely. And Midori herself makes it clear she stands on the shoulders of giants. She acknowledges a real debt to the sexual adventurers, the erotic pioneers, the pleasure seekers who came before her.
Yeah, she lists quite a few people.
She does. She specifically thanks figures like Dr. Carol Queen, Dr. Robert Lawrence, Dr. Annie Sprinkle, Laura Antonio, Karen Taylor, Joseph Bean, Kim Ayers, Karen Mendelsohn, and Michael Manning.
Loads of important names in the field.
And it's also deeply moving to see her dedication to those in the leather community lost to HIV to SHRC.
Hmm. A real sense of history and community there.
Definitely. Okay, let's unpack this. What are some of the core ideas Midori explores when she talks about SM&Ds?
Well, right from the beginning, Midori gets into her own personal motivations for engaging in SM.
Hmm.
For her, it's a profound search for, how does she put it, a moment's clarity and pureness of existence.
Wow, that's pretty deep.
It is. She sees it as a process of deliberately shedding the layers of societal expectations, those calcified defenses, and starched propriety, to find what she poignantly calls a naked soul.
A naked soul.
And what's particularly insightful here is her strong emphasis on being absolutely present in the moment during play.
Right. Fully engaged.
Exactly. Anything less, in her view, is a form of self-disrespect and dishonor. This suggests that the intense focus required in SM play can actually cut through the distractions of everyday life to reveal something more authentic.
That idea of being fully present seems to be a recurring thread, not just in kink, but in a lot of mindfulness practices, actually.
A great point.
It's almost as if the intensity of the physical acts requires a corresponding level of mental and emotional engagement.
Yeah, you have to be there.
Now, Midori also explores the motivations behind public play. Why would someone take something so inherently intimate and bring it into a public setting where they risk exposure and judgment? It seems counterintuitive.
Well, according to Midori, there's a fascinating mix of reasons. For some, the very fact that it's public is a significant part of the arousal.
The risk itself.
Yeah, the heightened risk of embarrassment or humiliation can be a powerful turn-on for both partners.
Yeah.
Then you have the element of exhibitionism, that desire to be seen,
Yeah.
combined with the thrill of potentially being discovered, and even the secrecy involved in keeping it hidden from others present.
It's complex.
Very. From a dominance perspective, there's the added dimension of control over the submissive's reactions in an unpredictable public environment, the pleasure of pushing their boundaries, and perhaps seeing them become aroused in an unexpected place. And for submissives, there's the unique erotic charge of the unknown aspects of their partner's plans and the excitement of testing their own limits and adventurousness in a risky setting.
It really reveals a fascinating tension between our private selves and our desire for external validation, or maybe transgression.
Huh.
Highlights how sexuality can be a powerful tool for exploring social boundaries.
Definitely. It's a different psychological landscape when you introduce the possibility of an audience, even if it's just the imagined gaze of strangers.
But with that increased thrill, there are also very real risks, right? Midori touches on the legal and social boundaries of public play.
Absolutely. She points out the very tangible legal consequences, which differ significantly depending on local laws concerning public exposure and what's considered lewd behavior.
Right, it varies hugely.
She shares her own anecdote of a quickie handfucking near a police station in San Francisco as an example of consciously pushing those boundaries and experiencing the thrill of potential discovery.
Risky.
Yeah, but then she contrasts that with the Folsom Street Fair, also in San Francisco, where you have this massive, incredibly open celebration of BDSM and leather culture, with law enforcement essentially tolerating very overt displays of kink.
It's like night and day, depending on the context.
Exactly. The key takeaway here is that what is considered acceptable varies incredibly based on location and the prevailing social context. What might be commonplace at an event like Folsom could get you into serious trouble, as she puts it, brutally beaten up in a more conservative area.
It really highlights how much of what we consider appropriate behavior, even in intimate realms, is shaped by social norms and legal frameworks.
It truly underscores how much of this is socially constructed and not some inherent moral absolute.
Yeah. Now, shifting from the public to the private sphere, Midori offers a really interesting and relatable example of how these dynamics can be woven into a regular evening. It doesn't always have to involve elaborate scenes or specialized spaces, does it?
Not at all. She suggests something as simple and integrated as collaring a partner before dinner.
Oh, interesting.
This small act can serve as a constant, subtle reminder of the power dynamic throughout the evening, influencing interactions in ways both big and small.
Huh. Like a background hum.
Exactly. She also recommends the idea of packing a small bag with a few carefully chosen items like plugs, Benoit balls, lube, and even some basic restraints like a blindfold or cable ties.
So you're ready for spontaneity?
Precisely. This allows for more spontaneous moments of play and erotic exploration that can be incorporated into everyday situations. It's a way of keeping that element of submission and the potential for sensual discovery present, even in seemingly ordinary moments.
So it's about cultivating a certain mindset and maintaining an awareness of the dynamic, rather than just waiting for pre-planned formal events.
Right, it's more integrated.
Let's pivot a bit and explore the often misunderstood connection between pleasure and pain in the context of kink. This is an area that often raises eyebrows for those outside the community.
Ah yes, pleasure and pain. This is where it gets really interesting. Midori references a CNN.com article that touches on Dr. Borsuk's intriguing speculation
Oh, yeah.
about the pain reward circuitry in individuals who engage in kinky practices potentially being wired differently.
Wired differently. How so?
Well, the idea is that the way their brains process pain and pleasure might be modified. She then uses a wonderfully illustrative anecdote: the intense masochist who can willingly endure significant flogging,
Uh-huh.
but will still wince at the mundane pain of stubbing their toe.
Huh. Right, that makes the point
Yeah.
perfectly.
It really highlights that the experience of pain within a consensual, kinky context is fundamentally different from the experience of everyday unwanted pain. It suggests that the element of choice, control, and the specific mental frame significantly alters the perception and processing of these sensations.
It's almost as if the context itself recodes the sensation. She also touches on a potential hierarchy of needs that she's observed within the SM world. Can you elaborate on what that looks like?
Yeah, she suggests that it often begins with the fundamental need to find community, connecting with others who share similar interests and desires, and learning the basic language and unspoken social norms of the kink scene.
Finding your people.
Exactly. From there, individuals often move towards discovering their own specific personal desires and boundaries. This is followed by the acquisition of practical skills, like learning basic knot tying for bondage or understanding safe flogging techniques.
Building a foundation.
Right. Interestingly, she draws a parallel to the developmental stages of early adulthood, where individuals start to explore their relationships with the wider world and often delve into more complex social interactions, which in the kink context might include exploring alternative relationship structures like polyamory or formalized D's dynamics.
That makes a lot of sense. A sort of gradual immersion and exploration that builds on a foundation of community and shared understanding.
It underscores the idea that engaging in kink is often a journey of self-discovery and increasing comfort within a community.
But she also offers a really important word of caution regarding the idea of Ds as a quick fix or a simple solution for deeper personal problems.
This raises a crucial point. Midori strongly cautions against viewing D's as a magic bullet for underlying feelings of being out of control or overwhelmed by the demands of the external world.
Because it's tempting, maybe, to think it could solve things.
Perhaps. Her argument is that simply abdicating control in a formalized submissive role, or conversely, taking control as a dominant, doesn't actually address or resolve those more fundamental internal struggles.
Right.
In fact, she suggests that the original problems might even fester and become more deeply ingrained under the surface of the D's dynamic. It's a powerful reminder that engaging in kink, while potentially therapeutic in many ways, is not a substitute for addressing core personal issues.
So it's not a form of therapy or an escape mechanism that automatically solves all your problems. It has to originate from a place of relative psychological well-being to be truly healthy and fulfilling.
Precisely.
What then, according to Midori, are the fundamental elements that contribute to a truly healthy and sustainable D's relationship?
She emphasizes conscious entry with explicit consent as the very first and most crucial element.
Conscious entry.
This can take many forms, from a formal collaring ceremony or the creation of written vows, to a simple but clear verbal acknowledgement and agreement on the roles and expectations within the dynamic.
Intentionality from the start.
Exactly. She contrasts this with more conventional relationships that can sometimes just fall into existence without that same level of intentionality.
Good point.
Secondly, she highlights the absolute necessity of clearly defined boundaries and terms, which essentially formalize the scope and limits of the relationship.
Knowing the rules of the game.
And finally, she stresses the ongoing importance of regular emotional maintenance. This involves consistently checking in with each other, openly communicating about shifts in personal needs or desires, and being willing to renegotiate boundaries as the relationship evolves.
Communication, communication, communication.
Always. She uses the long-lasting and thriving relationship of her friends Gumby and his wife Mistress as a powerful real-world example that underscores the vital importance of these principles.
That makes perfect sense. It really sounds like intentionality and open, honest communication are absolutely key, much like in any healthy relationship, but perhaps even more critical given the specific power dynamics that are at play.
Absolutely critical.
Midori also touches on the inherent difficulty of truly conveying the rich emotional landscape of D's to those who haven't personally experienced it.
Yes, she uses a truly beautiful and evocative analogy here. She compares the challenge of trying to describe the exquisite pleasure of a freshly picked, perfectly sun-ripened peach
Okay.
to someone who has only ever tasted bland, commercially grown hothouse fruit.
I get it. You can't really explain it if they haven't had the real thing.
Exactly. It powerfully illustrates that there's a depth and complexity of experience, a certain qualitative element that is incredibly difficult to convey through mere words. She talks about a special love with subtler nuances that those within the dynamic understand intuitively, but which remains largely inaccessible to those on the outside.
It's akin to trying to describe the sensation of a specific color to someone who has been blind from birth. You can explain the physics of light waves, but you can't truly convey the subjective experience.
Precisely. That's a great analogy, too.
Now, let's shift our focus to the role that protocols, ceremonies, and rituals play within kink communities. This sounds like it introduces a fascinating layer of social structure to what might initially seem like very individualistic and even transgressive practices.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is Midori astutely points out that despite the often taboo or marginalized status of kink, the communities that form around these practices are frequently bound by surprisingly specific social conventions, unwritten rules, and formalized protocols.
Really, even in spaces that prize breaking rules?
She draws an insightful parallel to humans as fundamentally tribal and social creatures who possess a deep-seated need for predictable behavior in what can often feel like a chaotic and unpredictable world.
Okay, that makes sense. A need for order.
Right. Protocols, as she explains them, are essentially formalized behaviors that serve to streamline decision-making within a relationship or group, reducing potential for confusion and providing a vital sense of certainty and shared understanding, ultimately fostering unity.
So it's about creating a sense of order and a foundation of shared expectations within what might seem like a very unconventional landscape. Can you give us a concrete example of these protocols in action to help illustrate the concept?
Certainly. She offers a contrast between a relatively simple protocol that might exist within a play space, such as always ask for enthusiastic consent before touching another person's toys,
Pretty basic.
and a much more complex set of protocols that might govern behavior at something like a formal dinner party of dominants and submissives,
Oh, wow.
where participants might be in various states of semi-restrictive bondage and operating under specific rules about when and how they are permitted to speak.
That sounds intense.
Can be. These protocols can become so ingrained that they operate almost subconsciously, much like the unspoken rules of etiquette in any social setting. But they can also be deliberately used to convey deeper levels of respect or even subtle forms of playful contempt, depending on how they are executed. However, it's really important to note, as Midori emphasizes, the inherently subjective and often arbitrary nature of these protocols. Her own personal preference, for instance, for submissives to walk to her left rather than her right, is just that, a personal preference, not some universally applicable law of the kink universe.
Right, so it's about what functions effectively within a specific dynamic or a particular community rather than a rigid set of rules imposed from some external authority.
Exactly.
And she introduces a really interesting guiding principle that she calls the rule of purpose in protocol.
Yes. The core idea behind this rule is that any established protocol should ultimately serve the needs of the relationship and the individuals involved, and not become an end in itself.
It needs to have a point.
Right. She uses the somewhat humorous example of a dominant who might require a submissive to meticulously memorize dozens of obscure and practically useless slave positions simply for the sake of the game of precision.
Okay, I can see how that might happen.
While that kind of detailed precision can certainly be fun and serve a purpose within a specific type of scene, if these protocols consistently hinder the smooth and efficient functioning of a service-based dynamic, for instance, by making even simple everyday tasks unnecessarily complicated and time-consuming, then they're considered to have failed the rule of purpose in protocol.
So the emphasis is on functionality and relevance, ensuring that the protocols actually enhance the relationship rather than becoming a source of unnecessary burden or frustration.
Exactly. Serve the people, not the protocol.
Now, how do ceremonies and rituals fit into this overall framework of social and relational structures within kink?
Midori defines ceremonies as special activities that are often deeply symbolic and less about practical application than protocols. They frequently mark significant transitions in status or within a relationship.
Like milestones.
Yeah, like a formal collaring ceremony,
Yeah.
a commitment ritual akin to a queer wedding, or even events outside of the immediate kink context like a baby's bris. She draws a distinction between grand public ceremonies, like a royal wedding, and more private or even solitary ceremonies, such as Romeo and Juliet's secret wedding. The level of influence and understanding of the underlying symbolism among the participants can also vary greatly.
Okay. And rituals.
Then we have rituals, which occupy a kind of middle ground between the frequency of protocols and the relative infrequency of ceremonies.
In between.
Right. Rituals often serve to regularly remind or actively reinforce a current status or dynamic within a relationship. Examples might include established Valentine's Day observances or routine morning caning. Just like protocols, these rituals are inherently subjective, and their significance is defined within the specific relationship.
So if protocols are more about the everyday order and efficiency, ceremonies mark important milestones, and rituals function as ongoing reminders and reinforcers of the established dynamics.
You got it. That sums it up nicely.
Midori also offers an interesting perspective on why she believes there's been a noticeable increase in interest surrounding the establishment of protocols in more recent times.
Her speculation on this is quite insightful. She suggests that in our modern world, which presents an almost overwhelming array of choices for self-expression and social freedom.
Choice paralysis.
Exactly. Individuals can sometimes experience a kind of emotional paralysis. This abundance of options can ironically lead people to seek out pre-tested formulas and behavioral guidelines from others, rather than having to navigate the complexities of figuring things out entirely on their own.
That makes a weird kind of sense. Too much freedom is overwhelming.
Yeah. Given the already somewhat precarious or marginalized nature of deviant sexuality, when combined with a lack of clearly defined behavioral guidelines, people might feel a sense of unease, leading them to desire immediate and readily available answers in a nice, neat, pre-tested package.
It's almost a paradoxical desire for structure and clear boundaries within a world that seemingly offers limitless freedom and possibilities for self-definition. Let's move into what can be a particularly sensitive and potentially misunderstood area. the topic of erotic humiliation. What are Midori's key insights on this form of play?
Midori explains that erotic humiliation play fundamentally involves the consensual challenging of someone's deeply held values and sense of identity within a safe and agreed-upon context.
Consensual being key.
Absolutely key. With the specific intention of creating sexual arousal through the experience of emotional discomfort. She introduces the important concept of pillars of identity, which she divides into primary, our most fundamental beliefs about ourselves and the world, and secondary, less core but still significant aspects of our self-perception.
Pillars of identity. Okay.
She notes that the destabilization of these identity pillars can trigger physiological responses within the body, changes in pulse, the release of specific neurotransmitters that are remarkably similar to those experienced during both fear and sexual arousal.
Wow, so it taps into something really primal.
It seems so. However, and this is an absolutely crucial distinction, if primary pillars of identity are disregarded or intentionally destabilized by external forces, particularly without consent or in a non-playful context, then the interaction immediately ceases to be erotic and becomes actively injurious and abusive.
That's a critical line.
It is. This underscores the critical importance of deeply understanding a partner's core values before engaging in this type of play.
So it's a very delicate and potentially risky line between consensual erotic play and causing genuine emotional harm. And she really emphasizes the highly subjective nature of what constitutes humiliation for different individuals.
Absolutely. Even an action that might seem relatively innocuous on the surface, such as simply kneeling, can evoke vastly different and intensely personal emotional responses, depending on an individual's deeply ingrained values and their personal sense of identity.
So kneeling could be respectful for one person and deeply humiliating for another.
Exactly. For one person, kneeling might be associated with a sense of calm, respect, or even belonging within a spiritual or relational context, while for another individual, the same act could directly conflict with their core sense of personal power, pride, and autonomy. The critical question is whether the specific action targets and potentially shakes the primary or only the secondary pillars of that individual's identity.
It really highlights the absolute necessity of knowing your partner on a very deep level and having a thorough understanding of their core values and vulnerabilities before even considering this type of play.
You absolutely have to.
What are some of the diverse motivations that might lead individuals to consensually engage in erotic humiliation?
Midori outlines several key motivations. For some couples, engaging in this type of play can actually foster a deeper sense of intimacy through the shared experience of vulnerability and the trust required to navigate these intense emotional landscapes.
Building trust through vulnerability. Interesting.
Others may find a form of temporary absolution or symbolic redemption through the experience of being symbolically mortified or debased within the scene.
Like a release.
Yeah. Interestingly, it can also lead to a renewed appreciation for the mundane aspects of life, for example. The simple pleasure of being able to freely use one's hands after having been restricted in a puppy play scenario.
Huh. I could see that. Appreciating the simple things.
And, for some individuals, the act of consensual humiliation is simply and directly a source of powerful sexual arousal.
It seems like the underlying motivations are as varied and complex as the individuals who participate in this type of play. Now, let's move on to the fundamental nature of dominance and submission itself, moving beyond the often simplistic and stereotypical portrayals we see in popular culture.
Right. What's insightful here is Midori draws a really important distinction between what she calls flashy or superficial displays of dominance and the idea that profound and truly powerful dominance can often be most effectively demonstrated through seemingly ordinary actions and even through one's choice of everyday attire.
So it's not always about the rip and the leather, necessarily.
Not necessarily, no. She outlines several core strengths that characterize a good dominant. These include a deep understanding of their own domain of influence and a keen awareness of when dominant behavior is appropriate within a given context.
Knowing when to turn it on and off.
Crucially, yes. She emphasizes that a truly good dominant treats individuals who have not consented to a dominant-submissive dynamic with kindness and respect in their everyday interactions,
Basic decency.
and possesses the self-awareness to understand that dominance is expressed in vastly different ways, depending on the specific situation and the individuals involved. They don't allow that dominant energy to bleed inappropriately into egalitarian relationships outside of explicitly agreed-upon play scenarios.
So it's about a deep sense of awareness, a fundamental respect for boundaries, and a strong understanding of context.
It's about responsibility.
Midori also introduces a fascinating concept that she refers to as the sacred third. What exactly does she mean by that intriguing phrase?
This is a really illuminating idea.
Hmm.
Midori proposes that in a deeply immersive and intensely focused scene, the dominant, in a unique psychological sense, actually becomes both the top and the bottom simultaneously.
Both. How does that work?
They create a self-contained universe of two, where their own desire becomes the pervasive force, essentially coloring the experience of both participants. This can lead to a fleeting but powerful sensation of omniscience and a profound sense of escapism from the ordinary concerns of everyday life.
Like stepping outside of time.
Sort of. She draws an interesting connection between this phenomenon and the intense pleasure and absorption we often find in both sex and sports arenas, where we can intensely focus on the creation of pleasure, engage with primal drives, and temporarily forget our usual obligations and anxieties.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
She also uses the example of her friend AX's specific fantasy of being anonymously bound, and used as another compelling illustration of this kind of liberating objectification where the individual surrenders to the dynamic and finds a sense of freedom within it.
It's almost like creating a temporary, self-contained reality with its own unique set of rules and internal dynamics. Now, trust is clearly a foundational element of any healthy relationship, but it seems to take on an even greater significance in kink dynamics where individuals can be in positions of heightened vulnerability. Midori explores the multifaceted nature of trust within these contexts.
Yeah, this raises a really important set of questions. She begins by raising a concern about whether everyone who seeks a sense of belonging within the kink community is necessarily doing so for healthy and constructive reasons.
Good point.
While acknowledging the obvious dangers of predators and those with malicious intent, she also expresses concern about everyday individuals within the scene who seem to experience chronic unhappiness or a persistent sense of unfulfillment despite their participation in kinky activities.
Kink isn't a cure-all.
Exactly. She also reflects on the recent increase in more positive mainstream media portrayals of SM and wonders if this shift in public perception has inadvertently created somewhat unrealistic expectations. Perhaps the notion that kink is a guaranteed path to constant joy and a simple solution for pre-existing personal problems.
That's a really insightful point. Sometimes more positive representation can inadvertently gloss over the inherent complexities and potential challenges.
Right. The nuance gets lost.
And she also mentioned something she calls the seminarization of SM. What does she mean by that term?
Midori expresses a concern that the growing emphasis on technical expertise, detailed risk assessment, and the near obliteration of any element of unpredictability within SM workshops and seminars
Okay.
might be unintentionally overshadowing the core joy and spontaneous exploration that often lies at the heart of these practices. She worries that this increasing bureaucratization of radical sex could potentially stifle individuality and lead to a kind of unintentional conformity within the scene.
So it's about finding a healthy balance between education and safety on the one hand, and allowing for spontaneity, personal exploration, and the pure enjoyment of the experience on the other.
Precisely. Don't let the rules kill the fun, essentially.
Now, she delves into the more nuanced aspects of trust within SM relationships, drawing a distinction between long-term committed partnerships and more casual play encounters.
Yeah, what's particularly insightful here is she suggests that within deeply committed relationships, like that of her friends Joe and Jane, the very depth of their shared history, familiarity, and emotional intimacy can sometimes paradoxically make it more challenging to fully suspend disbelief and immerse themselves in certain types of intense play.
Really? You'd think it would be easier.
You would, but they might actually find it easier to engage in more extreme scenes with casual acquaintances, where those artifacts of familiarity aren't constantly present to remind them of their everyday dynamic.
Ah, that's counterintuitive.
It is. But this mutual hesitation to engage in certain types of play together can, somewhat ironically, be misconstrued as a loss of trust within their primary relationship.
That's a really fascinating paradox. It highlights how the very closeness of a long-term partnership can sometimes create unexpected barriers to certain types of intense role play.
It's complicated.
What about the dynamics of trust in more formal professional SM contexts?
In that specific scenario, the nature of trust is different. The client, like the example of Mike she provides, operates under a set of assumptions that are largely based on the commercial nature of the interaction.
Transactional trust.
In a way, the expectation of a basic level of technical competence from the professional truthfulness in their advertising of services, a guarantee of confidentiality regarding the encounter, and a fundamental respect for clearly established boundaries.
Makes sense.
Individuals might seek out professional dominance for a variety of reasons, such as the lack of compatible partners within their personal social circles or a strong need for discretion and anonymity.
So the trust in that context is more transactional and centered on specific professional standards and expectations. How does that compare to the kind of trust that develops in more casual play scenarios between non-professionals?
In casual play situations, the development of trust is often more limited in scope, primarily focusing on the skills and emotional care needed for a specific scene.
Trust for the moment.
Pretty much.
Hmm.
The individuals involved are generally less concerned with the broader long-term life implications that might be relevant in a committed relationship. This type of interaction can offer a sense of catharsis and the freedom to explore very focused personas within the confines of the agreed-upon scene.
Right.
However, in contrast, long-term committed leather relationships, where a much greater portion of the individual selves are deeply intertwined, the potential for profound vulnerability is significantly higher, and therefore requires a much deeper and more encompassing level of trust that extends far beyond the boundaries of a single scene.
It really illustrates that trust isn't a monolithic concept, but rather a spectrum that varies significantly depending on the context, the intensity of the interaction, and the depth of the relationship between the individuals involved.
Exactly. It's nuanced.
Now, aftercare is a term that frequently comes up in discussions surrounding kink and BDSM. Midori emphasizes its absolutely vital importance.
Absolutely. She doesn't mince words, comparing aftercare to the fundamental necessities of air and water, something that is absolutely essential for well-being, yet often overlooked or taken for granted.
Air and water. Wow.
She breaks down the process of aftercare into three distinct but interconnected phases. Phase 1 is the immediate aftercare, which begins as soon as the scene concludes.
Right after play stops.
Yep, this involves a clear acknowledgement of the end of the play, attending to any immediate physical needs, such as addressing scrapes or bruises, allowing for a period of emotional cool-down and reintegration, expressing any enjoyment or appreciation for the scene, and making arrangements for any further check-ins that might be needed.
Landing gently.
Exactly. She strongly emphasizes the importance of respecting individual preferences in aftercare. Some might crave physical touch and reassurance. Others might need quiet solitude and the necessity of consciously planning time for this crucial phase.
That makes perfect sense. A gentle and mindful easing back into everyday reality after an intense and potentially disorienting experience. What does phase 2 of aftercare entail?
Phase 2 is what she refers to as the check-in, which often takes the form of a phone call or message the day after the play.
The next day call. Okay.
This is a vital step in addressing the potential for drops in adrenaline and other neurochemicals that can sometimes lead to a noticeable dip in mood, energy levels, and overall emotional well-being following the intensity of a scene.
The sub drop or top drop.
Exactly, that potential dip in mood and energy levels following the intensity of a scene due to changes in brain chemistry. The next day check-in provides a valuable opportunity for both partners to offer reassurance, express gratitude for the experience, provide validation of each other's roles and contributions, and also to gain deeper insight into their partner's psychological state post-play, which can inform future interactions.
Good for feedback, too.
Definitely. Importantly, Midori stresses that aftercare is not just the responsibility of the dominant partner. It's equally vital for tops and dominants themselves, who also experience significant chemical shifts and whose sense of self-worth can often be closely tied to the perceived success and impact of the scene.
Right. Everyone needs care.
Positive feedback and open, constructive communication during aftercare are essential for both parties.
So it's a process of mutual care and support that extends beyond the immediate physical and emotional aftermath of a scene, regardless of the specific roles played. And what about phase 3, which she describes as the deeper aftercare?
This third phase addresses any deeper emotional issues or unresolved feelings that might surface in the days or even weeks following a scene.
Longer-term stuff.
Right. These issues might require support that extends beyond what a play partner can provide, and could potentially involve reaching out to trusted friends within the community, or even seeking professional guidance from a therapist who is knowledgeable about kink dynamics.
Having a wider support network.
Crucial. Midori underscores the importance of having a support network of people in your life with whom you can openly and honestly discuss your kinky experiences and any related emotional challenges.
It sounds like a really comprehensive and holistic approach to ensuring emotional well-being surrounding these often intense and transformative experiences.
It really is very thorough.
Let's shift gears now to explore a specific type of dynamic, the concept of chastity as a form of power. Midori shares a personal experience that significantly shifted her initial perspective on this.
Yes. She candidly recounts her initial skepticism towards chastity play, and then describes a transformative personal experience using a CB2000 device.
Okay, what changed her mind?
What profoundly struck her during this experience was a noticeable shift in focus and intention. She observed that the clarity of intent of the dominant partner was significantly amplified.
Hmm.
And perhaps surprisingly, the submissive's arousal seemed to stem primarily from the dominant's evident pleasure and control, rather than direct genital stimulation.
Wow, so the arousal wasn't from being touched, but from the control itself.
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
This led her to a deeper understanding of the great joy of very real control over a fully consenting submissive that chastity can offer, emphasizing the psychological power dynamics at play. She mentions exploring it more since then as an expression of power.
It's a really fascinating example of how the psychological aspects of Ds can be incredibly potent and can sometimes lead to unexpected sources of arousal and connection. She concludes that section saying, "It's not what you do, but why you do it that makes all the difference."
A powerful summary.
Midori then delves into what she calls the art of control, offering some rather direct and explicit advice on techniques and mindset.
Yes, her approach here is very much centered on the idea of investing time and effort in genuinely motivating the submissive to serve well, rather than simply resorting to issuing immediate and perhaps uninspired demands.
Put the effort in.
Right. She emphasizes the fundamental importance of pleasuring a submissive as a crucial first step before attempting to exert deeper control, using the memorable and rather evocative phrase, "You gotta know how to make a pussy purr before you can make it growl."
Huh. Very direct.
Very. She then goes on to suggest specific techniques, such as strategically ordering the submissive to present themselves in ways that can create both psychological imbalance and sexual embarrassment.
Setting the stage mentally.
Exactly. Following this, she offers practical physical techniques involving the careful use of hot and cold sensations, like ice cubes and warm water, along with cautious use of muscle creams like Tiger Balm, always with clear safety warnings.
Okay, sensory play.
The incorporation of breath fresheners and ginger for sensory play, and various forms of percussive stimulation like light whipping or spanking. She suggests combining techniques, varying the pace. She does, importantly, include specific safety warnings regarding the use of potentially irritating substances like chili oil or hot sauce, strongly advising against their use in such sensitive areas. She mentions fisting and e-stim as more advanced topics for another time.
It's a very hands-on and sensory-focused exploration of power dynamics as expressed through sensual and sometimes challenging play. Let's move on to another classic element often associated with kink, the practice of bondage. Midori offers some foundational advice for those who might be curious about exploring this area.
She wisely recommends starting with a willing partner in pleasure and emphasizing the importance of keeping the initial explorations fun and light, suggesting simple beginnings like incorporating a blindfold or a soft scarf for gentle restraint.
Start simple, keep it light.
For those who want to delve into the more intricate world of rope bondage, she strongly advises consulting reliable resources on both knot tying techniques and safety protocols. She specifically recommends resources like the Boy Scout Manual for basic knots.
Really? The Boy Scout Manual?
Yep. Also, Jay Wiseman's comprehensive erotic bondage handbook and her own book, Seductive Art of Japanese Bondage, which offers a more sensual and artistic approach.
Good resources.
Personally, Midori describes her own deep connection to rope, viewing it almost as a physical extension of desire, capable of both tender caressing and firm binding.
That's quite poetic.
It is. She even shares a brief anecdote about teaching at a private SM academy, highlighting the passion for learning and the strong sense of community she observed within the leather world.
It's interesting how she connects the very physical act of tying and being tied with the more abstract emotional expressions of desire and connection. Now, Midori includes the section in her book that she playfully titles A Kinky Questionnaire. Can you give us a flavor of some of the multiple choice questions she includes?
Absolutely. It's a really fun and lighthearted way to illustrate the sheer diversity of individual preferences and specific fetishes within the kink spectrum.
Okay, like what?
Some of the multiple choice questions she poses include things like your favorite type of foreplay, with options ranging from a long romantic walk to an exciting trip to a fetish shop.
Huh. Quite the range.
Various specific fetishes.
No.
from classic high heels and latex catsuits to the more unexpected choice of chicken feathers.
Chicken feathers. Okay.
Preferences for iconic female sex symbols, offering a quirky mix of options like Britney Spears, classic pinup Betty Page, and even the Muppet character Big Bird in drag.
Big Bird and drag. Seriously.
Seriously. And a range of favorite sex acts, from the traditional missionary position to the more elaborately restrictive scenario of mummification with plastic wrap.
Wow. It really underscores just how vast and imaginative the landscape of kinky interests can be, and that there truly is something for almost everyone.
It certainly does. It really drives home the point that there's no single definition or set of preferences that encompasses the entirety of the kink world.
Let's move on to discuss the leather community. What insights does Midori offer into this specific subculture?
Midori defines the leather community as a largely informal but deeply interconnected social network that primarily emerged in North America during the mid-20th century. Historically, it has been strongly associated with gay and lesbian individuals who share an interest in SM practices and often value hierarchical social structures within their community.
A specific history there.
She references influential authors like Dr. Gail Rubin, Joseph Bean, Jack Ranella, and foundational texts like Urban Aboriginals and Leatherfolk that explore the history and cultural significance of this community.
So it's well documented.
And she emphasizes that identifying as a leather man or leather woman is primarily about social affiliation, shared values, and a sense of belonging within this specific subculture, rather than being solely defined by a particular leather fetish or engaging in heavy SM play.
So it's as much a cultural and social identity built on shared interests and values as it is a purely sexual one.
Exactly. It's about belonging.
Midori also shares some of her own personal and rather specific sensory experiences that she finds particularly arousing.
She mentions being utterly mesmerized by the visual allure of stiletto heels, the distinctive smell of rubber gas masks, and the tactile sensation of soft fur against her skin,
Specific triggers.
illustrating the diverse and often highly personal ways in which different forms of sensory input can become powerfully linked to erotic arousal.
It really underscores the highly idiosyncratic and personal nature of what we find attractive and arousing. Now let's delve more deeply into the realm of fetishism. According to Midori, what fundamentally defines someone as a fetishist?
Midori defines a fetishist as an individual for whom sensual and sexual arousal is significantly enhanced and often primarily triggered by specific objects, particular body parts, or other elements that are not directly related to conventional sexual intercourse.
Things not directly part of the reproductive system.
Exactly. Things like specific types of clothing, materials, or even seemingly unrelated objects. She mentions even designer shoes aren't part of the reproductive system. She emphasizes the incredibly vast and imaginative range of fetishes that exist, essentially bounded only by the limits of human imagination, from airplanes to X-Men outfits.
It truly seems almost limitless in its possibilities and the sheer variety of things that can become erotically charged for different people. And she goes on to distinguish between different types of fetishists based on the scope of their attractions.
Yes, she differentiates between monofetishists, who experience arousal from a very strict and specific singular focus of desire,
That's one thing.
and polyfetishists, like yourself, who find themselves attracted to multiple and often more adaptable fetishes.
Multiple interests.
Right. She also touches on the sometimes contrasting perspectives that these two groups might hold of one another, with monofetishists sometimes viewing polyfetishists as perhaps less dedicated or casual in their attractions, while polyfetishists might see monofetishists as somewhat rigid or limited in their erotic scope.
Interesting dynamic within the fetish world itself.
Definitely. She also makes a crucial point in clarifying the common misconception that fetishism is inherently linked to being a submissive in a power dynamic, and that it cannot exist independently of that kind of exchange.
Right, you can be a dominant fetishist.
Exactly. In reality, fetishists can be tops, bottoms, or engage in egalitarian relationships. It may not even require a partner at all for their arousal and satisfaction. Fetish attire can make vanilla sex kinky.
So fetishism is really a distinct aspect of sexuality that doesn't necessarily have to overlap with or be contingent upon these dynamics or any specific power exchange.
Correct.
Midori also offers some thoughts on why some individuals within the SMDs community might sometimes view fetishists as being lightweight or less serious in their kinky interests.
She suggests that this perception might stem from the differing primary motivations, core turn-ons, and typical behaviors that characterize fetishists, who may not necessarily prioritize the intense power exchange or extreme physical sensations, that are often central to the erotic experience for some within the SMD's community.
Different goals, different priorities.
Mhm. However, she also astutely observes the relatively higher prevalence of fetish interests among individuals who identify as SMD's players, perhaps due to shared cultural touchstones like specific attire that functions as a kind of community uniform,
Like leather.
or a more general shared capacity to experience sexual arousal through symbolic and non-genital forms of stimulation. She gives this great description of a gloved hand interacting with the submissive, blending D's and the fetishistic arousal from the leather glove.
It really comes down to different priorities and what ultimately constitutes a powerful and fulfilling erotic experience for different individuals. Midori also explores the important distinction between what she terms sexual fetishism and romantic fetishism.
Yes. Sexual fetishism, as she explains it, is when the specific object itself directly and primarily affects sexual arousal. A classic example might be someone who finds intense solitary pleasure in wearing or interacting with a pair of high-heeled boots.
The object is the focus.
Right. Romantic fetishism, on the other hand, occurs when the fetish object is more intimately connected to a specific desired person or a particular romantic fantasy. An example of this might be someone who is particularly aroused by their partner wearing a specific uniform or piece of clothing that is tied to a cherished fantasy or memory.
That distinction makes a lot of sense. It clarifies whether the erotic charge is inherent in the object itself or arises more from its association with something or someone else.
Exactly.
Midori also delves into the historical context and evolving understanding of fetishism.
This is truly fascinating historical journey she takes us on. She traces the very term fetish from its origins in ancient practices of fetish protection to its somewhat clinical categorization as a form of psychological illness during the 19th century, a period marked by intense social and scientific efforts to classify and categorize various aspects of human behavior.
The era of classification.
She draws interesting connections between the rise of fetishism as a recognized phenomenon and significant broader social changes, including the decline of traditional religious authority, the increasing emphasis on individualism, and the massive migration of people to industrial urban centers, where material goods began to take on new significance as expressions of personal identity.
So the understanding and categorization of fetishism is really intertwined with broader cultural and societal shifts over time. But she also points out that for individual fetishists in the present day, those historical origins might not hold much personal relevance.
Exactly. For the individual, what truly matters is the immediate power of potential for personal fulfillment and sensual pleasure that the fetish object holds.
It's about the here and now.
Right. She also discusses how the rise of visual media, such as photography, film, and video, provided natural outlets for the expression and exploration of fetish erotica. Initially, due to prevailing societal shame and judgment, these forms of expression were often kept private, which ironically may have further enhanced their transgressive allure and arousal potential.
The forbidden nature adding to the intensity of the experience. And she also touches on the ongoing debate of whether fetish images should be classified as pornography or as art.
She acknowledges the undeniably erotic charge and the potential for commercial intent that can lead to the label of pornography. But she also strongly emphasizes the role of the artist in using evocative symbols and imagery for personal self-expression and as a means of earning a livelihood.
It's a fascinating look at the blurred lines between desire, commerce, and artistic expression. Midori also briefly considers whether the unique magic of fetish might have somewhat waned in Western societies due to increased sexual freedom and the pervasive saturation of erotic imagery in various forms of media.
Yeah, she poses the interesting question of whether the increased mainstream availability of explicit erotic imagery has perhaps diluted the once potent power of specific fetish objects in erotica.
Has it lost its edge?
Maybe a little. However, she ultimately concludes on a more reassuring note, referencing a striking photograph by Steve Godet as a powerful reminder that the symbolic power and evocative potential inherent in fetish objects and imagery persist, even in our more sexually open and visually saturated culture.
A testament to the enduring nature and personal significance of these desires and symbolic representations. Now, Midori offers a very personal and richly sensory description of submissive service and feminine potency, using a vivid personal experience as her central example.
She paints an incredibly detailed and evocative picture of herself, adorned a striking fetish attire, a sleek latex catsuit, playful cat ears, gloves removed to allow her to type, and a silver toe ring adding a subtle detail.
Very visual.
Very. In this scene, a collared and bound young man, identified as A, is serving as her willing footstool, beautifully illustrating a very personal and powerful expression of feminine dominance intertwined with foot fetishism.
Wow, quite the image.
She then goes on to list a variety of desires that can be expressed and explored through actions involving the feet, the giving and receiving of pleasure, the seeking of attention, the experience of pain, the embodiment of humility, the art of seduction, and playful teasing.
So feet as a tool of power.
Exactly. For Midori, and for many others who share this perspective, sex that lacks this element of symbolic power inequity can feel fundamentally incomplete, no sex at all, and the feet become a natural and potent extension of their erotic power.
Interesting.
She emphasizes that this sense of feminine potency is deeply rooted in a fundamental sense of confidence, in embracing oneself as a sexual being deserving of pleasure, in having the agency to ask for what one desires without shame, bitterness, or fear,
Owning your desires.
in recognizing and celebrating one's own unique beauty and grace, in the ability to both establish and change boundaries as needed, and in the strength to embrace one's own vulnerabilities.
It's a really powerful assertion of feminine agency and the intentional wielding of power within a D's framework. She also offers a crucial caution regarding the way in which this kind of power should be exercised.
Yes, she specifically warns against engaging in wantonly destructive behavior, emphasizing that those who truly understand and harness feminine power do so with intention and awareness of their impact, unlike those who might inadvertently leave a trail of wounded hearts due to a lack of self-awareness or consideration for others.
So it's about intentionality, self-awareness, and a sense of responsibility in how one wields influence within these dynamics.
Responsibility is key.
Midori then goes on to describe a vibrant and exclusive event within the community that powerfully celebrated feminine power in its diverse forms.
She vividly recounts attending an exclusive birthday play party specifically for leather women, showcasing an incredibly diverse range of personal styles, from butch to femme and everything in between, and andro styles too.
Sounds amazing.
She describes a particularly memorable scene involving multiple women pleasuring the birthday celebrant, highlighting the strong bonds and sensual connections within that community.
It sounded like a really empowering and deeply sensual event that celebrated the multifaceted expressions of female sexuality within that specific subculture. Midori then guides you, the listener, through a very personal and potentially insightful process of identifying your own heroines of femininity.
She encourages you to take some time to consciously list the women you consider to be your personal heroines of femininity, and then to carefully note the specific attributes and qualities you admire most in each of them.
An interesting exercise.
Following this, she prompts you to reflect on how those very same elements, perhaps in different forms or to varying degrees, might already exist within yourself. The goal of this exercise is to encourage a reevaluation and broadening of your own personal concept of feminine power.
Finding the heroine within.
Exactly. She further encourages reflection on both the external societal expectations and the internal personal beliefs you hold about feminine dominance, and to consider any potential conflicts that might exist between these expectations and your own genuine desires.
Internal versus external pressures.
Right. Finally, she suggests using your curated list of feminine icons as a source of inspiration for potential role-playing scenarios with a trusted partner, as a way to consciously break free from the constraints of everyday manners and limitations, and explore different facets of power.
It sounds like a really valuable exercise in self-discovery and in consciously exploring different aspects and expressions of power, both within oneself and in relationship with others.
Very much so.
Let's move on to the practical considerations of fetish fashion and parties. What kind of guidance does Midori offer for navigating the often intriguing world of fetish attire at such events?
She directly addresses the common and often pressing question of what shall I wear to fetish events, immediately highlighting that the attire guidelines for these gatherings often explicitly require attendees to wear what is considered appropriate fetish wear.
Dress codes apply.
They do. She clarifies that while there's a generally understood aesthetic encompassing materials like latex, leather, PVC, as well as certain styles like uniforms and corsets, regular everyday clothing might not be considered acceptable and could even lead to feeling out of place or not adhering to the event's specific vibe.
Make an effort.
Exactly. In response to a reader's specific question, MJ in LA, she offers practical advice for masculine fetish party wear, suggesting that exploring fantasy uniforms can be a fantastic solution for men seeking to express themselves beyond more basic leather or latex ensembles. She even recommends specific retailers like Torture Garden, House of Harlot, and Mr. S. Leather.
So putting deliberate thought and effort into your attire is really seen as a sign of respect for both the event itself and the broader community of attendees.
Yeah, often is, yeah.
Midori then offers a fascinating comparison of three distinct photo shoots that all incorporate elements of fetish and bondage.
This comparison is quite illuminating. She describes three different photographic contexts. One for a mainstream high-fashion magazine, one for an adult-oriented fetish bondage website, and one focused on creating iconic and artistic fetish imagery.
Different goals for each.
Right. Interestingly, she notes that the high-fashion shoot, despite its mainstream context, turned out to be significantly more physically demanding on the model than the other two.
Really? More demanding than the kink shoots.
Apparently so. This really highlights the different sets of priorities, expectations, and practical demands that exist within these seemingly related, but ultimately quite distinct, creative, and commercial worlds.
It really challenges some of our preconceived notions about what goes into the creation of these different types of visual imagery. Midori also delves into the significant role played by the fetish photographer in shaping our individual and collective experiences of fetish and sexuality.
She underscores the profound influence these photographers have in shaping not only our individual erotic sensibilities, but also our broader cultural understanding and representation of fetish and sexuality, drawing insights from a conversation she had with the photographer Michelle Serchuk.
They shape how we see things.
She emphasizes that for many fetish photographers, there's a deeply personal mission involved, a desire to reflect their own unique sensuality and to provide validation and visibility for diverse sexualities that are often marginalized or misunderstood.
Art as validation.
Exactly. Furthermore, she explains how the act of being photographed in an erotic or fetish context can have a powerful and positive impact on the self-awareness and overall sexual energy of the individual being photographed. Midori ultimately encourages celebrating and appreciating the art of these sexual, fetish, and erotic photographers, and even suggests exploring the possibility of creating your own images as a form of self-expression and exploration.
It's a powerful reminder of the role that visual representation plays in both understanding and celebrating these often intensely personal forms of desire. Let's now turn our attention to the power of objects, a concept that is clearly central to the world of fetish. Midori shares a very personal and visceral experience with a particular fetish item.
She provides a vivid and evocative description of the transformative experience she has when putting on a pair of 6-inch stiletto boots.
Ah, the boots again.
Yep. She recounts the immediate surge of power and the significant boost in confidence that she feels these objects evoke within her. She goes on to explain that for many fetishists, objects are not merely inanimate things, but are imbued with a potent capacity to arouse,
They hold power.
and that the relationship with these objects often involves elements of both voyeurism, admiring and desiring the object, and exhibitionism, wanting to be seen with or using the object.
It's about the deep psychological connection and the almost alchemical sense of transformation that these carefully chosen objects can evoke within the individual. Now, for those who are looking to integrate their kinky interests into their travel plans, Midori offers some very practical and experience-based advice on travel with kink toys.
Yes, drawing from her own personal encounters with airport security and the potential for misunderstandings, her primary piece of advice is straightforward. If there's any doubt whatsoever about an item, always pack it in your checked luggage rather than your carry-on.
When in doubt, check it.
Exactly. She also recommends taking sensible precautions like securely fastening your luggage and being mentally prepared for the possibility that your bags might be selected for inspection. For smaller, less conspicuous items like clothespins, she suggests packing them in see-through bags, perhaps grouped with other similar items.
Be organized.
Crucially, she strongly warns against attempting to pack anything that could be perceived as a weapon, such as police-style handcuffs with keys, any kind of blades, or toys that realistically resemble weapons in your carry-on luggage,
Definitely don't do that.
as this could lead to significant delays, confiscation, potential detention, or even arrest. She even shares an amusing anecdote about a friend whose innocent hot rollers were once mistaken for a suspicious device resembling a bomb.
Hot rollers is a bomb. Oh dear. Definitely some crucial and practical advice to keep in mind before your next kinky getaway.
For sure. Better safe than sorry.
Let's delve into some more specific techniques now, starting with exploring clamps and suction cups.
Midori provides helpful guidance on researching and acquiring various types of clamps, suggesting a range of options from commercially produced nipple clamps available at specialty stores to more readily accessible items like standard clothespins, memo clips, and even grip clamps from hardware or office supply stores.
Lots of options.
Plenty. She offers essential tips for using them safely and effectively, such as always starting with gentle pressure, varying both the intensity and the duration of application, and being aware of the potential for added sensations by attaching chains or small weights.
Start light, experiment.
Right. She cautions specifically about clamps with sharp teeth and suggests either filing them down or using a tool dip coating for safety. To prevent slippage, she recommends using a small amount of cornstarch or baking powder, but explicitly warns against using baking soda.
Practical tips there.
She encourages self-experimentation as a form of personal research and recommends the Toy Bag Guide to Clips and Clamps as a valuable resource. Regarding suction cups, she explains the basic mechanism of how they work on nipples by creating engorgement. She offers practical tips for maintaining suction, such as slightly wetting the rim of the cup before application and avoiding areas with hair. Finally, she describes the more delicate technique of using a smaller suction cup on the clitoris, emphasizing the need for gentle pumping due to its heightened sensitivity and highlighting the potential for intense sensations, especially when combined with other forms of clitoral stimulation.
Really practical and safety-conscious advice for those curious about exploring these specific sensations. What about the intriguing practice of hot wax play?
She begins by emphasizing the critical importance of choosing the right type of candles for this activity, specifically recommending paraffin wax candles as being generally safer than beeswax or candles that contain added perfumes or glitter, which can cause irritation or burns.
Candle choice matters a lot.
Definitely. Her first crucial piece of advice is to always test the temperature of the melted wax on your own skin first before applying it to your partner.
Test it first. Always.
Always. She also advises thoroughly preparing the play area with old sheets or towels to catch any drips and using a generous amount of baby oil on the skin to facilitate easier removal, especially on areas with hair.
Prep work saves cleanup.
She suggests that the breasts, back, belly, and limbs are generally good areas to target, while cautioning against using hot wax on the face and head hair due to potential risks. She also notes the particularly intense sensation of hot wax on the tongue and suggests starting with other, less sensitive areas before considering the genitals, or the cunt, as she puts it.
Start slow, be cautious.
Regarding technique, she explains that it's best to hold the lit candle relatively high initially and then gradually lower it to carefully control the temperature of the dripping wax.
Again, a strong emphasis on safety and a gradual approach to exploring these potentially intense sensations. Midori also shares some valuable insights into the art of the whip.
Her primary advice for those beginning to explore whips is to always start with a very soft touch, almost using the whip like a delicate silk scarf to get a feel for its movement before applying any significant force.
Gentle start.
Right. She strongly recommends dedicating time to practicing control and proper technique, suggesting excellent resources like the instructional video Whip Cracking with the Masters and the book The Bullwhip Book.
Learn the technique.
Definitely. She even suggests looking into taking classes at circus or rodeo art schools as a way to develop fundamental skills while acknowledging that you might need to be discreet about your specific motivations for learning.
It's about developing both skill and control for safety, but also for maximizing the intended sensations and impact. Let's move on to the topic of spanking and gags. Midori uses a suggestive scenario to illustrate the power dynamics involved in spanking.
She presents a classic fantasy scenario of a naughty schoolgirl being spanked to illustrate the interplay of power dynamics and roleplay elements. She highlights the importance of establishing a clear reason for the spanking, a naughty infraction that needs to be corrected, and the potential for building sexual tension within this type of scene.
Setting the scene.
When it comes to the use of gags, she immediately stresses the paramount importance of safety, noting that many commercially available gags can potentially impede breathing.
Gag safety is huge.
Huge. She specifically advises against using solid ball gags, inflatable types that could obstruct the airway, and the dangerous practice of taping the mouth shut, especially for anyone with pre-existing breathing issues.
Definitely avoid those.
She suggests safer alternatives that still allow for mouth breathing, such as horse bits or loosely tied cloth strips. She also points out that biting down on a gag can sometimes enhance the feeling of being a struggling captive and can also serve as a way to process more intense or painful sensations.
Interesting psychological aspect there.
Yeah. She warns against using gags made of metal or other hard materials that could potentially chip teeth. Given that commercially manufactured gags may not fit everyone comfortably, she even suggests a low-tech DIY alternative using a practice golf ball secured with a leather thong.
Resourceful.
Very. Most importantly, she stresses the absolute necessity of establishing clear and reliable safe signals and safe words when using any form of gag, due to the inherent limitations on verbal communication. She suggests using specified grunts or having a small object that can be easily dropped as a signal of distress.
Nonverbal signals are critical.
Absolutely. Finally, she briefly mentions the idea of stuffing fabric in the mouth, like a pair of soaked panties, as a form of gag, but cautions against using materials with loose threads or anything that could be bitten off and potentially inhaled, posing a choking hazard.
Again, safety is clearly the top priority, especially when engaging in activities that can restrict breathing or communication. What about the use of hoods and stocks in kink play?
Midori explains that hoods can be used in bondage for both physical restriction and sensory deprivation, but she issues a strong warning against ever suspending someone by the hood alone due to the significant risk of neck injury.
Okay, definitely no neck suspension.
Absolutely not. She also highlights other potential hazards associated with hoods, including limited airflow, which can be especially dangerous with excitement or facial swelling, and hoods that have integral gags, reiterating all the previously mentioned gag safety concerns.
Breathing is important.
Very. She also notes that some individuals experience claustrophobia or heightened anxiety when wearing hoods. For those who are apprehensive, she suggests exploring options like mesh hoods or strappy designs that allow for more airflow and visibility.
Options for comfort levels.
Regarding stocks, she describes them as highly effective devices for limiting movement, particularly the heavier, more substantial types. She mentions various ways they can be used, such as attaching them to furniture for stability or even suspending them from the ceiling for more elaborate setups. She also notes the existence of stocks that combine restraints for both arms and legs.
Very restrictive.
Interestingly, she references Michael Kerrigan's book, The Instruments of Torture, as a source of ideas inspired by medieval restraints, but strongly advises adapting these historical designs for consensual and absolutely safe kink play, always prioritizing well-being over historical accuracy in a play setting.
It's about understanding the potential inherent risks and always modifying practices to ensure safety within a consensual framework.
Safety first, always.
Let's now touch upon the more specialized realms of medical play and electrical play.
Midori acknowledges the surprisingly common nature of medical-themed fantasies within the kink world, ranging from relatively mild scenarios like naughty nurse roleplay to more intense themes involving examination, interrogation, and even fantasies of castration, a specific interest sometimes referred to as iatronudia.
A wide range of medical fantasies.
Indeed. She stresses that any exploration of these themes must always be done with fully consenting partners. Sharing a brief personal anecdote, she mentions enjoying the mad scientist role when using electrical stimulation toys.
Mad scientist, huh?
Yep. However, this leads to a serious discussion about the critical need for caution and responsibility when engaging in electrical play that goes beyond basic vibrators.
E-stim needs care.
A lot of care.
Yeah.
She explicitly highlights the potential risks to vital organs like the heart, as well as the ears, eyes, and brain. As a general safety precaution, she recommends keeping electrical play below the waist.
Below the waist. Good rule of thumb.
She also warns about the potential for skin burns and nerve damage, even with seemingly milder toys like violet wands. It's also important to be aware that electrical stimulation can potentially interfere with implanted medical devices.
Serious risks involved?
Very.
Yeah.
Given these significant risks, she suggests exploring lower cost and potentially safer alternatives, like electrified fly swatters, with the strict caveat of use only below the waist.
A fly swatter.
And remote-controlled dog training collars. Again, with the same crucial below-the-waist restriction.
Dog collars. Still need caution there.
Oh, absolutely. Finally, she describes a specific fantasy involving the use of a remote-controlled electrical device, specifically mentioning Tech as a brand, on a submissive in a public setting, emphasizing the element of subtle control and the ability to elicit discreet and unseen reactions.
It sounds like both medical play and especially electrical play are areas that demand a significant amount of knowledge, caution, and a deep understanding of potential risks.
You really need to know what you're doing.
Finally, Midori offers some valuable guidance for those considering becoming a professional dominant, and also shares some very insightful letters to a slave hopeful.
She begins by clarifying that the preferred and more contemporary terms are professional dominant or pro-dom for a feminine-presenting individual, rather than the somewhat dated term dominatrix.
Good clarification.
She strongly emphasizes that having significant real-life experience in SMD's dynamics with multiple partners, including experience in the submissive role, is absolutely crucial before even considering pursuing this as a profession.
Experience matters on both sides.
Definitely. She then presents a comprehensive form letter containing a series of important questions that anyone considering becoming a professional dominant should honestly ask themselves.
A self-assessment.
Exactly. These questions cover a wide range of essential areas, including their depth of experience, whether they hold certifications in CPR and first aid, their level of emotional maturity, their business acumen and understanding of the legal aspects involved, such as registering a DBA, having access to a lawyer, and understanding bail bonds.
The business side is crucial too.
Very. Necessary health precautions,
Right.
like hepatitis vaccination, a basic understanding of human physiology, the ability to maintain strong personal boundaries, and being free from any substance abuse issues.
A lot to consider.
Definitely. In her open letter to those who aspire to serve as a slave, she emphasizes the importance of a genuine desire to serve, rather than being driven by selfish fantasies or fixed, unrealistic expectations of what slavery might entail.
Manage expectations.
Right. She outlines several key expectations a dominant might reasonably have of a dedicated slave, including diligently learning the dominant's personal preferences and interests, both within and outside of kink, knowing how to properly pronounce their name, and understanding how to provide appropriate care during times of illness or stress.
It's about attentiveness and care.
She also highlights the expectation of diligently caring for the dominant's property, such as leather gear, latex, and footwear, and maintaining their living quarters to their standards. Furthermore, she emphasizes the importance of learning what kinds of gifts genuinely delight the dominant and understanding their standards of hospitality.
The practical side of service.
Yep. She even offers specific examples of basic courtesies, such as remembering to send cards on birthdays and holidays with the specific note that her birthday is May 4th and to avoid mediocre chocolates.
Details matter.
They do. More generally, she advises aspiring slaves to proactively learn things that please their dominant, such as developing skills in conversation and learning massage techniques. She also requests that personal fetishes or desires to see the dominant in specific attire be reserved for appropriate playtime conversations, emphasizing that the dominant's personal wardrobe is for their own pleasure.
Respecting boundaries, even in service.
Crucially, throughout the letter, she stresses that a true D's relationship, particularly in a 247 dynamic, requires ongoing diligence and is far from a passive role. Finally, she explicitly grants permission for the aspiring slave to ask polite and thoughtful questions as a way to learn and become a better servant.
It paints a very clear and realistic picture of the significant responsibilities and considerations involved on both sides of that particular dynamic. She also briefly touches on how the expectations of transparency can vary across different types of relationships.
Right, like partnerships versus casual versus owner-slave.
And introduces the influential anthology Leatherfolk, Radical Sex, People, Politics, and Practice as a foundational text in queer culture and community studies.
Yeah, she highlights its significance as a classic work, featuring contributions from diverse BDSM practitioners. It explores the history of the gay and lesbian underground, the link between radical sex and spirituality, and the personal meaning of SM. She even quotes a positive review praising its depth.
So Wild Side Sex really does cover an incredibly wide range of topics and perspectives within the multifaceted world of kink.
Indeed. From exploring the underlying psychological motivations for engaging in SM to the intricate details of protocols, the fascinating world of fetishes, the essential importance of aftercare, and a multitude of specific techniques, Midori provides a deeply personal, insightful, and often quite humorous look into these often misunderstood and marginalized communities.
And as you've heard throughout this discussion, this exploration reveals the incredibly diverse motivations, personal experiences, and often surprisingly structured social frameworks that exist within kink communities, always with an underlying emphasis on the fundamental importance of enthusiastic consent, clear and open communication, and a deep sense of self-awareness.
So as you've listened to this deep dive, what particular aspects resonated most strongly with you? What new perspectives have you perhaps gained on the wide spectrum of alternative sexualities and the people who explore them?
And here's a final thought to leave you with. Given the often intricate systems of rules, the carefully considered rituals, and the paramount importance placed on clear and honest communication within kink relationships, What valuable lessons might mainstream society take away and apply to building more mindful, intentional, and ultimately more fulfilling connections in all kinds of relationships?
We certainly encourage you to continue exploring these fascinating topics further and to delve more deeply into Midori's wild side sex or other related resources if anything we've discussed today has sparked your curiosity or intrigue.